Today's video does contain content that some viewers may find disturbing, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you want to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. This story began when I was 19 years old. I was living in a large Canadian city. I had graduated high school the year prior and was struggling to find a job while deciding what I wanted to study in college. For context, I was living in a crowded neighborhood, and just a 5-minute walk up the street, you would reach a busier road with lots of little cafes, small markets, pharmacies, bars, restaurants, parks. Pretty much everything you needed was nearby, and everybody knew everybody. My father spent his retirement days taking a walk up the street to meet his buddies at the bar. One of his close friends worked as a janitor at the pharmacy just across the street, and due to his troubling back pains, he offered me a job to help him clean the building after hours to help ease the pain off his back, and he would pay me cash every week. Of course, I accepted. It was short hours, easy cash, and very close by. Best of all, I would have an empty building to work in, and I did not need to interact with people. Since the pharmacy building was just across the street from the bar that my father would most likely be at, I would stop to chat with him before going to work. One of my father's friends, let's call him Frank, a 60-plus-year-old man, was having a beer with my father one afternoon. Frank was always really friendly to me, and I didn't mind interacting with him. However, things have shifted, and I started feeling afraid of Frank. One evening, as I'm working in the pharmacy clearing out the trash and mopping the floors, I glanced out the front door, which thankfully are locked by this hour. I noticed Frank pacing back and forth right in front of the building. I thought nothing of it, and I continued cleaning up. An hour later, I passed by the front doors again and noticed that Frank is still standing outside. By this point, it's nearly 10 p.m. and dark outside. I unlocked the door and asked if he was okay. He responded by saying that he wanted to know what time I got off work. Being young and naive, I thought that was okay to ask since I knew him. And I told him that I finish whenever I'm done cleaning up, but I didn't mention that I was nearly done for the night. Luckily, by the time I was finished and was ready to head home, the street was completely dead silent and deserted. The very next night, I headed out to work at 5 p.m. and began cleaning up. This building is divided into 2 separate buildings. The main one and one office next door has a different address. This means that sometimes I need to exit the main building and walk outside to get to the other building. This night, I had my mop with me and a few garbage bags heading into the next door building. As I stepped outside, there was Frank, standing around again facing the building, as if he was waiting for me. I felt uncomfortable, and a little bit afraid. He tried talking to me, but I cannot remember what he was trying to say, as I was too focused on hurrying over to the next building. I got inside and locked the door right behind me, leaving Frank outside. It was a small office building, so I was done within 30 minutes. As I headed to the door to head out, Frank was still standing there. I didn't want to leave until he was gone. At some point, my boss calls me on my cell phone to ask me why I'm taking so long. I couldn't help but explain to him that Frank, who he was also friends with, was standing outside waiting for me. A minute later, I heard my boss come outside and yelled at Frank to leave me alone while I'm working. Thank goodness. I finished my work for that night, and I peeked out the doors to see if the coast is clear before heading home. I was relieved to see that not a single person was out there. Then again, it was after 10 p.m. I walked up the street to wait for the crosswalk to turn green so I could cross and head home. As I'm waiting, I hear someone behind me. I turn to see who it is, and, sure enough, it's Frank. I wanted to cry out of frustration and fear. He approached me and began a normal conversation, pretending that he wasn't being creepy at all. He was telling me that he wanted to take me to the movies that night. I laughed and was too shy to tell him to screw off and just said, "What? It's late already." He said it was okay and there were movies that late at night anyways, and I insisted that I should go home to change, meet him back at the corner, and he would wait there at the corner for me to come back and then take me to the movies. He asked for my phone number, and being too scared and stupid, I began giving him my digits. Luckily, I snapped back into focus mode and changed the last 2 of my digits. I pretended to go home to change and to meet him later. I hope he waited there all night because I went to shower and got into bed, peacefully sleeping. A few days later, I went up the street to visit my dad at the bar before my next shift. The store connected to the bar had a shoe sale going on and had set up a table full of shoes outside to attract more customers. I walked past, not interested anyway, but there was Frank, just outside the bar. He stopped me, and he guided me to the table full of discounted shoes and said that he wanted to buy me a pair, whichever pair I liked. By this point, I was fed up, and I ignored him and entered the bar. I approached my dad, and he noticed Frank talking to me outside, and asked what we talked about. I was too embarrassed to tell him the truth, so I said, nothing, really. Right after I answered that, Frank was standing at the doorway of the bar talking to some guys, and my blood started to boil. And I ended up telling my father the truth instead. Actually, he offered to buy me a pair of shoes. Absolutely enraged, my father stood up tall in his chair and gave me a look of, "What did you just say?" I then told him everything. Frank has been waiting for me outside of work, too, and he tried taking me to the movies late at night one night. My father did not even waste another second. He walked up to Frank and right away punched him right in the neck in front of a crowd of people. "Don't you ever speak to my daughter again. Don't you ever approach her, you son of a bitch," he yelled. Frank was shocked, apologized to my dad repeatedly, looked me right in the eyes and apologized to me as he walked away. I thought that was the end of it. I hadn't seen Frank anywhere for a few weeks after that, when, suddenly, my dad started going to a different bar, just 10 steps away from the first one. It was much darker, quieter, and really just a depressing-looking bar. The further in you go, the darker it gets. My father and I sat at a little table and started chit-chatting. From the top of his shoulder, I noticed a man sitting in the far end of the bar in almost complete darkness. I knew it was Frank, but I didn't panic nor did I mention it to my father, because I knew he was staying away after being throat-punched in public. Eventually, my dad moved to sit at the bar instead of the table, so, of course, I followed. Frank then sat a little bit closer to us, still keeping a distance, though. After starting to feel uncomfortable from Frank's stares, I asked my father, "Can we sit at the front of the bar? I just want to be closer to some sunlight." He agreed, so we moved again to the very front. A minute later, Frank changed tables again, closer to us once more. He looked really angry and revengeful. I can't explain it. He just looked very pissed off, unlike the Frank that I knew beforehand. After a while, we decided to head home. It's a 5-minute walk for me, but my father being elderly with physical issues, he needs to take a few breaks here and there to rest his back and catch his breath. While we were walking, he needed to take his first breaks, so he sat down on the edge of someone's concrete fence. As I waited for him to rest, I noticed in quite some distance behind us, Frank was heading our way. But he just stopped, standing in the middle of the sidewalk, just staring in our direction. He was far enough away that I wasn't too worried. My dad got up and we continued walking, having no idea who was behind us. A minute later, he needed to rest again. I turned around to check and, of course, Frank was still there. He seemed to stop walking every time we stopped walking. This happened a few times, and I was getting more and more freaked out. Frank didn't know where I lived. Even though I lived so close to work, where he was stalking me, he never really followed me home, thankfully. Until that day. We got really close to the house now, and Frank was catching up behind us. I didn't want him to know where I lived, so I lied to my dad and said, "I really need to use the washroom. Do you mind if I go ahead?" Of course, he had no problem with that, and I hurried up home. I wanted to get inside before Frank saw which house that I went into. I immediately went up to my bedroom window, which faces the road that we were on. This is when I noticed my hurrying home made no difference, because Frank could just wait and see which house my father went into. As I'm watching through my bedroom window, I saw that my father noticed who was behind him. He yelled at him to screw off. I guess my father protected us also and stood there until Frank went way beyond him, so he didn't see where we lived. After a while, Frank very slowly walked past every house, my father standing a dozen feet behind him waiting for him to leave. He looked at every house trying to see if he could see me through a window. I was well hidden. He wouldn't have seen me. As he continued making his way down the street, he got so frustrated that he started punching himself in the head a few times. I can't help but wonder what his plan was, if he was so angry and following us home that day for the first time with that face full of rage. This was the last time I ever saw him, before I learned years later that he got severely mentally ill and was put into an institution. So, Frank, let's never, ever meet again. Hi, this is my first post in this community. I was reminded of this incident the other day after a woman posted about being stalked by a creep for almost 10 years. Well, I too started using Facebook and Orkut when I was 14. Back then, in 2009, I didn't have many friends in school, and I was elated to meet a few like-minded people online. I posted pretty regularly on a group dedicated to my small hometown. I became friends with quite a few people from the same group, but I tried to limit my interaction with people who were of my age. One day, I received a friend request from a guy, let's call him K, who was in his late 20s. I skimmed his profile, and I came to know that he was a high school chemistry teacher. I noticed that he was into writing poetry, and he posted poems and memoirs on his timeline frequently. He was undoubtedly good at writing. Anyways, I accepted his friend request and forgot about it. A few days later, I received a text from him where he introduced himself. It was a formal conversation. He asked me about my school and future plans. I didn't really think much about it. As time went on, we started chatting more often, and I told him that I wanted to take up literature in college as my major. So, he would often send me links of his poems published in various online portals to my email, from an alternate email of his, and asked for feedback. After a few months, right before my school finals, I began experiencing anxiety attacks stemming from the fear of academic failure. One day, I spoke to Kay about it, and he told me that many of his students go through similar problems, and he counsels them out of it. He gave me his number, and he asked me to call him whenever I felt anxious. He said that he would help me just like he helped his students. I knew my parents would be furious if they found out that I had exchanged phone numbers with a stranger online. But one day I decided to call Kay from our landline number. I didn't have a cell phone until I was 17, when my parents weren't home. We spoke about the usual stuff, but before hanging up, he asked me if this was the time that my parents were normally at work and there was no one home. And I said yes. After that, he started calling me in the afternoon almost every day. Sometimes I wondered why a fully grown man, who was supposed to have a life of his own, would invest so much of his time on a teenager. Sometimes he even called me from his work. Even though the topics of discussion during the phone calls were generic, I still grew a little uncomfortable. One day, our maid, not a luxury in India, overheard me talking over the phone with Kay for an hour. I think that she figured out it wasn't someone from my school by the way I was speaking. She immediately alerted my mother. As expected, she was furious. I was not only grounded until my finals, but my parents also looked through my Facebook and my emails. The next day, my mom came home early from work, and she picked up the phone as soon as it started ringing and asked Kay to never contact me again. I removed him from my friends list, and we never spoke again. Cut to 6 years later in 2015, I'm a second-year college student living in a completely different city. One day, I received this friend request from a woman that I didn't know or have any mutuals with. At this point, I was only using Facebook to stay connected with people that I knew in real life, so I deleted her request. A month later, the same woman sends me another friend request and I delete it again. Unlike the first time, she resends the request just after a few hours of it being rejected. I decided to have a closer look at her profile. She had never posted anything significant. Nothing unusual, until I took a good look at her information section. The email ID used to create that Facebook account was the same one that Kay used to email me with. I was shocked. I dug a little deeper, and the account only had 5 friends. One of them was a guy, let's call him R, whose timeline was full of explicit content, including cropped screenshots from pornography videos, photos of minors in school uniforms, etc. But what startled me was a photo of a desk that he had posted. Even though it had been years, I still recognized that desk and window. Kay posed in front of it in one of his DPs when we were friends. It's his house. I checked the other profiles on the woman's friend list, and they were equally shady, and posted similar content as ours. I also Googled her display picture. It was originally posted by a woman on a matrimonial site. Honestly, I was a little freaked out. I always found Kay wanting to talk to a minor for hours to be creepy, but I never imagined that the guy would go to this extent. But I guess that's how creeps work. Later, I also found text in my other folder sent from that fake profile. Anyways, I blocked all of the accounts involved. It was super weird. If I ever have children, I'm going to make sure that none of their online activities go unsupervised until they're adults. We moved into our apartment/townhouse complex at the beginning of the year. We live in a cute little loft-type townhouse. My husband works about an hour away and does a hybrid schedule. Part-time, he works from home, and the other he goes to the office. He also works a swing shift, so he doesn't come home until around midnight. We wanted to be closer to our friends and family, so we moved into a gated community in our hometown. The security guards make my husband feel better about leaving me alone with the dogs on the days that he had to go to the office. I first noticed weird things happening the first week that my husband went back to the office. Every day when I took my dogs out, I would have to go outside first because someone kept leaving food on our doorstep. I was constantly throwing it out. I even mentioned it to my spouse, and I thought that it was on purpose, and it was annoying that it was the food dogs shouldn't eat. Then I noticed the guy. He would smoke in front of my apartment. He was in front of one of the apartment buildings, but I never saw his face because he was always in the shadows. I would just see his shadow and red embers of whatever he was smoking. So far, not so bad, right? Things started to escalate when whoever it was realized what my husband's schedule was. As soon as it got dark, I would hear walking back and forth from the pathway between the buildings. At first, I just thought it was people in the complex walking their dogs, but I started hearing light knocks at my door. So light that I wasn't sure that I was hearing them at first. I would peek out my window and see no one. As weeks passed by, the knocks would get louder, but every time I would check, there would be nobody there. Sometimes I would open the door, and no one. It's super easy to get away, though. We're a corner unit, and there's 4 paths to go to different areas of the complex. It was weird. But things kept escalating. And my dog started to react and would bark when she sensed someone walk to the door. I would hear a man giggling when I would go down the stairs to open the door, but they would be gone by the time I actually opened the door. Once the dog was snarling by the big window next to the door, and I had the creepiest experience. Someone was whispering and taunting the dog. They were saying things like, "What are you gonna do, puppy? You can't get me." Or, "You want to bite me, boy? But you can't." I was terrified and called the security guards to tell them what was going on. They came. No one was there except the smoking guys, who said that he saw nothing because he had just come out. Security patrolled for a couple of nights, but nothing happened on those nights. Again, this only happened when my husband wasn't home, so whoever it was knew his schedule. And suddenly, and as quick as it started, it stopped. I also noticed that the smoking man was now gone. Rumor was that he was part of an infamous toxic couple in the complex. You would hear them for hours screaming at each other, until one day she'd had enough and her brother came to help her kick the dude out for good. It was then that things clicked. The couple was quiet at night. They never fought after dark. The dude that was smoking only came out after dark. While I only saw him in the same spot, he was probably the one that was messing with me. Things stopped as soon as he got kicked out. What creeps me out more is that when I took the dog out, he would sometimes wave hello. Now it makes sense why our dog always pulled me away as soon as she spotted him. I have a short and super basic story that is probably considered tame in comparison to some of the others out there, but to me was one of the most terrifying nights of my life. My boyfriend and I rent a house that is owned by his aunt and uncle and is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. We live on the outskirts of a small town, but the land out here is owned by his family, and this house was built to be in the back corner of their lot. It was supposed to be their getaway cabin, or something like that. We ended up in a weird situation, and we needed a place to stay, and they basically told us we could live there as long as we paid rent, and they didn't want much, so we jumped on it. That's all to say that the house itself is rather isolated, and there's only one way to get there if you're not on foot, and that is the long driveway that goes out to a gravel road. There are no other houses around, as, again, his family owns all this land and this is in the back corner. The part of this that I don't like is that my husband's job has him sometimes going on business trips that last around 3 to 4 days. And when this happens, I get to spend time alone in this empty cabin. I'm going to be honest here, there is very little that I'm scared of, but when I'm alone, I get terrified of how dark and quiet this place ends up being. As you can probably assume, the creepy story happened on a day where he was out of town, and I was home all by myself. It was the middle of spring, and my husband was a couple of states away for a conference, so I was home alone with, at the time, a very young puppy that we had taken in from a friend of his, so that me being alone didn't feel quite so lonely. I had spent the whole day trying to train him to not go on the floor, and taking him for a walk around the property, so I was pretty exhausted by the early evening. Since it was just me and the pup, I decided to go ahead and sleep on the couch with the TV on, which I know that's not healthy, but I didn't want to go sleep in the bed all alone. So I'd put on a TV show and was just lying there with the puppy, watching whatever came on, and I heard what sounded like someone walking outside the window. I obviously jumped up because, again, a super isolated little house out in the middle of nowhere. I perked up a bit, and I looked out the nearby window to see if someone was there, but I couldn't really see anything. After a few moments of feeling a bit anxious, I finally came to a mental conclusion that there was no way that I heard somebody. It was probably just the wind or a deer or something like that. I got comfortable again, and I started to doze off after just a few moments. Probably around an hour after I fell asleep, I did one of those half-awake, slow wake-up things, where I was mostly conscious but my eyes were still closed. After trying to go back to sleep, I started thinking that I was smelling something. Something that didn't smell like my home. It almost smelled like a person's bad breath. At first I thought it was the dogs, but I slowly opened my eyes to try to figure out what it was, when the source of it was literally right in front of my face. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw the face of a man that I have never seen before in my life, just staring at me. I don't think I have ever jumped that hard in my life, and I definitely let out a quick scream, which caused him to jump as well. He then gets up and starts running towards the door, and before he leaves, he seriously looks back and says, "You forgot to lock your door," and then takes off into the yard. I was just sitting there with my heart racing a mile a minute, watching this man walk out my front door and down the driveway to the dirt road, and just take off down the road like nothing had ever happened. I have absolutely no idea who this man was, how he knew my house was here, and why the hell he had walked into my house like that and been staring at me. There was no reason for him to be on this property, or to be anywhere near my house. And what's worse, I know for a fact that I did not leave the front door unlocked, because I lock it the second I get inside. It's a habit. So I don't even know how he got into my house. I obviously told my husband and his family that owned the property. They didn't know who he was based on the description either. So that was the most terrifying moment of my life. And it definitely made me want to never stay home alone ever again. The next couple of times that my husband went out of town, I actually took the dog to his aunt's house a few miles down the road and just stayed there. Of course, now the pup is full grown, and he's one hell of a guard dog, so I'm not really anywhere near as concerned. But I still hope that I never meet that man ever again. It was the month of January, and I had just gotten done with my exams at college. I'm 21, and being in a long-distance relationship, I hadn't seen my boyfriend in over 3 months. Since I had some free time, my boyfriend and I planned this getaway trip to the mountains, as it was the prime time to experience the snow. Although this meant that I would have to fly out to his city, I've never been there before, so I was a little skeptical at first, because this trip had to be kept a secret from my parents, not approving me having a boyfriend, let alone traveling with him. But we had been together for 5 years, so I was determined to go. All of my friends knew about this trip and had all the required details. Fast forward to the day of my flight, I was seated in the window seat next to a fairly older guy, probably in his late 30s. I was on my phone, and so was he. He was texting someone back and forth, and I remember thinking how annoying his phone's notification ringtone was. He gave me a very weird vibe the moment he sat next to me, but I shrugged it off as I thought it was just prejudice against him. As the flight took off, I noticed no one occupied the aisle seat beside him, and I wondered why he was not moving up there because, 1, naturally, anyone, whether me or him, would like some privacy. 2, men usually shift or make space for a woman in our country in a public setting. The man was glued to the seat, and I could feel his eyes on me when I was looking out the window. Some time passed by and he started making small talk and questioning me. Things like, where are you from? Are you going to stay in the city that you're flying to? How old are you? Is your friend coming to pick you up from the airport? I could feel the creepy vibes oozing from his sinister face, and I knew that I had to be smart enough to not tell him my personal information. I lied to him, and I told him that I indeed lived in the city that I was flying to, so there couldn't be any chance of him trying to mislead me. I avoided him and did not take my eyes off of my phone for a long time. He tried to put on the nice guy act and started telling me about his job and travel plans for the upcoming weekend, and I wasn't even replying to him at this point. I could, in some way, physically feel him getting closer to me. I was a little freaked out, but I thought I could handle this for another 20 minutes before the flight landed. At this point, the overhead lights are dimmed off in the flight, as it was night, and at the exact time, I swear this creep grinned and relaxed before staring down at me like we were in love or something. I just backed up to the window and started clicking photos of the view from the flight. This is when the creep says, "You're so cute. Can you give me your number?" I was frozen. He was inches away from my face. "No, that's weird," I replied, not being too angry about it considering he could be a psycho killer. "Give me your Instagram then." At this point, I was sure that this dude would not stop at this. "No, I have a boyfriend. Stop," I said sternly. This creep stared at me without blinking and put on the mask of a nice guy again, and then offered me a bottle of water. I was glad the flight attendant announced that we were about to land. I would finally be away from him. This is when he started to extend his hand towards me and whispered, "Can I hold your hand?" I was scared because I thought that this guy was definitely going to touch me. "What? No, are you mad?" I managed to semi-scream. He just gave me a blank look and said, "But why?" I kept quiet and was internally praying for him to leave me the hell alone. The flight eventually landed, and I hurried to get out of there with my stuff. I turned back a few times and I could see that he was pointing towards me, and his friends were all smiling and staring at me. I quickened my pace toward the baggage claim, and so did he and his friends. I started texting my boyfriend frantically, and he told me to stay calm and to just get out of the airport as quickly as possible without him catching up to me. I picked my bags, and I got out of the terminal and was waiting for my cab, and I was relieved that I finally made it out. A couple moments later, I felt someone touch my hair, and I turned around and this creep was standing behind me with a crazy smile on his face. My heart was beating so hard that I thought it would jump out of my chest. "Do you need a ride home? And we could take you. Don't hesitate too much." Without saying anything, I picked my bags up, and I walked up closer to a family with kids, and I asked if they could accompany me to the parking lot where my Uber was waiting for me. I told them the entire ordeal, and how this weirdo would not leave me alone. They accompanied me and waited until I was gone. I thanked them several times. This weirdo kept staring at me with his cold eyes and sunken cheeks as my Uber drove past him. He thankfully did not follow me or anything. I finally reached my boyfriend safely. The trip went smooth. I didn't think about this incident much because it was just a blur at that point. A few months later, while scrolling through my Instagram, a new follow request popped up on my profile. I opened it. My heart was in my mouth. It was that creepy weirdo. He had somehow found my Instagram. His message popped up with, "Remember me?" I blocked him, and I deleted my Instagram, and I haven't been back on there since. P.S. My inner voice told me to complain about the weirdo to the flight attendant, but I didn't because I was already running late, and I had only an hour to reach the bus stop during the rush hour. I didn't want to waste time at all by explaining the situation and getting consoled by everyone. I wasn't even sure how this thing would even pan out if I complained, because my country is a little weird about these things. I just wanted to get out of the airport ASAP and reach the bus stop in the next 40 minutes, which was only possible if I could run out of the airport. Although, I do insist that if you're in a situation like this, try to get to a crowded place and ask for help from someone. Better if they're a group of friends or family. Plus, make sure you do your research about the city you're going to, and know where you're going. I, 22, female, had an unsettling thing happen, and I need support or somewhere to share. I don't know, I'm freaked out. Anyways, I'm a pet sitter, and I've been pet sitting in my area while taking college classes for 4 years now. I'm well established, and usually very on top of things. This slip could have cost me. Yesterday, I got a call from someone who needed a pet sitter to walk their dog, but they live out of state, and were going to be in a hotel room. It sounds sketchy already. I try to see the good in people, though, so I pushed forward with the meet and greet, which was today. My boyfriend overheard me talking to my mom about where I was going, and he was immediately suspicious. He told me all about human trafficking and the different methods they use. He said he absolutely did not want me to take the job no matter what story they gave me. I told him I couldn't just cancel the meet and greet, so he drove me there. I met a woman in her 50s with her husband and the dog. They said they were here on business working in construction. Everything went fine. She showed me around their hotel room and gave me instructions for the dog along with the room key. We talked about my college classes and my future plans, but I was on guard the whole time. I noticed when we entered the stairwell to go upstairs, the husband said he was going to get the laundry and went downstairs as we went up. So then, I was even more on guard. It's a little weird because they had just arrived at the hotel an hour before we met. Why would they be doing laundry? I agreed to the 1 week of walks, gave her my rate, and I left. Skip forward to later, and we tried digging deeper to find out all that we could about these people. My boyfriend searched the phone number of the lady, and it gave a lot of information. Addresses, names, a lot more than I expected. Out of all the information we found, the weirdest and freakiest thing was that the number she gave me was activated in July, 1 month ago. What the heck? I mean, maybe it could be a coincidence, but that was weird. The reason I say that my boyfriend saved me is because I didn't think of any of this stuff. Call me stupid if you want, but if he didn't overhear me and talk some sense into me, I would have blindly gone through with this, and who knows what would have happened. I'm supposed to start on Tuesday, but I'm gonna make up an excuse and cancel. Around 3 or 4 years ago, when I was 12, I was at my aunt's house visiting for camp. I was upstairs and saw the camera go off saying that someone was at the back door. It was my older cousin, so I went downstairs to open the door. I was able to see him for a little bit before I actually got to the door, with the window by the door. He looked so determined and focused on opening the door. He spent less than a minute there and then got in his car and sped off. I didn't think much about this, honestly. All I thought was, oh, he must have been in a rush if he didn't bother to call us to open the door. I was even thinking about opening the door and calling out to him before he drove off, but I was feeling lazy that day. About 2 minutes later, the house phone started ringing along with my personal phone and my grandma's phone. I picked it up, and it was another one of my aunts telling me not to open the door and to stay away from the windows. They told me they had already called the cops, but that I should call again. I was confused, and I had asked what happened. They explained that my aunt and cousin got into a very heated argument about the business that she owned and left him $300,000 in debt the day before that led to him hitting her. The next day, he came looking for her very upset, but he couldn't find her at the office. He proceeded to drive to my aunt's house while on the phone with some family members, telling them how he was going to kill my aunt, which was his mother. I remember going to the kitchen and picking up a knife to keep with me just in case. I was shaking while thinking about where to hide. He ended up coming back, and he started walking around the house looking through the windows before he sat on the front step. Luckily, I was on the second floor. I don't even know what exact time I called the police due to my panicking. The cops ended up coming and made my cousin leave, but my grandma wanted to talk with him first. Throughout their whole talk, I still hid upstairs listening through an open window. I prayed that she didn't mention my name in case he came back later in the night. Luckily, he never did. To this day, I am so glad I did not open that door. I feel like I was truly protected. We normally don't lock both the screen door and the actual door, but we did that day. He struggled so much with the lock on the screen door that he broke the handle. Luckily, it didn't open to the door where he knew the code. The situation still gives me so much anxiety, and I don't understand how we went back to acting like nothing happened. I've never been back since, just in case he snaps again. So that was today's collection of stalker and stranger creepy encounter stories, however you want to name them. Really doesn't matter. They all have the same idea behind them. People are creepy, yo. Because that's the truth. People be creepy, yo. Don't laugh at me. It's not funny. Patience over here laughing at me. Anyways, so that was today's collection of stories. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. And as I have always said, and will continue to say, this collection of stories is intended to be both entertaining, sure, but also educational. If listening to these stories helps anybody realize that they may be putting themselves in a weird situation that they shouldn't be putting themselves in, then it's done its job, and I'm happy. So please always keep that in mind when listening to these. Yeah, good collection of stories. Like I said, both entertaining but also educational. And I appreciate those who submitted their stories and let me use their stories on Reddit. So thank you to each and every single one of you. If you enjoyed this video, not these stories, it's multiple stories. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting that thumbs up button and yeah, letting me know you liked the video in a comment down below and your thoughts, how you're doing, what your new favorite song is, just anything you want to talk about. Also, if you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider hitting that subscribe button. You can also tip with the thanks button, join memberships, or go to my Patreon, where you can get early access to my content like this. Sorry, Patience keeps making weird faces at things, and I don't know what she's doing over there. Anyway, those things where you can get early access to content like this. And yeah, all that said, friends, I hope you're having a beautiful week. I hope I do see you on the next video, but until then, remember, you are valid, you are important, you are loved, you are the best you that you can be, and you should never let anyone tell you otherwise. And of course, until I see you again, sleep well.